The scorching sun blazed overhead as Sarah Martinez felt her lips crack and her tongue swell in her mouth. 3 days without water. 3 days of walking through endless sand dunes with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination that was slowly fading with each passing hour. The people she trusted most in the world had driven away, leaving her with nothing but tire tracks disappearing into the horizon and the crushing realization that she might never see her children again. But what Sarah didn't know was that 200 miles away, a Navy SEAL team was preparing for what they thought would be a routine training mission. What they would discover instead would test every skill they had learned and force them to make a choice that would either save a life or watch helplessly as the desert claimed another victim. This is the story of betrayal, survival, and the extraordinary rescue that defied all odds. It's about a woman who refused to give up when everything seemed hopeless, and the heroes who appeared when she needed them most. What happened in those final moments before the rescue helicopter spotted her will leave you questioning how far the human spirit can be pushed before it breaks completely. Some stories are too incredible to believe. This one is too incredible not to be true. Sarah Martinez had always believed that family meant everything. Growing up in a small town outside Phoenix, Arizona, she learned early that blood was thicker than water, that relatives would always have your back, and that trust was something you could count on when the world got tough. At 34 years old, she was a single mother working 2 jobs to support her 8-year-old daughter Emma and 6-year-old son Jake. Life wasn't easy, but Sarah had built a small circle of people she could depend on, and at the center of that circle was her cousin Rick and his girlfriend Amanda. Rick Martinez was 2 years older than Sarah and had always been the adventurous type. Where Sarah was cautious and methodical, Rick was impulsive and bold. They had grown up together, spending summers at their grandmother's house, sharing secrets and dreams under the desert stars. When Sarah's husband left 3 years earlier, Rick had been there, helping her move apartments, babysitting the kids when she worked late shifts, and promising that she would never be alone as long as he was around. Amanda Walsh had come into Rick's life 8 months earlier, and Sarah had tried her best to welcome her. Amanda was beautiful in an obvious way, with bleached blonde hair and a laugh that was just a little too loud. She worked at a casino in Scottsdale and always seemed to have money for designer clothes and expensive dinners, though she was vague about exactly how much she made or where the money really came from. Rick was completely smitten, and Sarah had learned to bite her tongue when Amanda made cutting remarks about her secondhand clothes or her old Honda Civic that needed constant repairs. The trouble started when Sarah inherited her Greytance property. Aunt Dolores had been the family eccentric, living alone in a trailer on 40 acres of desert land about 60 miles east of Phoenix. The property wasn't worth much, just scrubland with a few cacti and endless views of nothing, but it was hers free and clear. More importantly, recent development in the area meant that the land might be worth something someday. Sarah saw it as security for her children's future, a nest egg that could pay for college or help them buy their first homes. Rick saw it differently. Within a week of the inheritance being finalized, he started dropping hints about how Sarah could really use a business partner, someone who understood real estate and could help her maximize the property's potential. Amanda was even more direct, suggesting over dinner one night that Sarah was being selfish keeping all that land to herself when Rick had been such a good cousin to her over the years. The pressure intensified over the following months. Rick would call late at night, explaining investment opportunities and development deals that could turn Sarah's inheritance into real money. Amanda would show up at Sarah's apartment with glossy brochures for vacation homes and luxury cars, painting pictures of the life they could all have if Sarah would just be reasonable about sharing her good fortune. Sarah resisted, but she could feel the relationship changing. Rick became distant and irritable. Amanda's comments became sharper and more personal. Family gatherings became tense affairs where Sarah felt like an outsider in her own family. The breaking point came when Rick suggested that Sarah sign over half the property to him as a gesture of family loyalty, promising that he would help develop it and split any profits. When Sarah refused, the mask finally came off. Rick accused her of being greedy and ungrateful, forgetting all the times he had helped her when she needed it most. Amanda was even crueler, suggesting that Sarah was too stupid to understand business and would probably lose the property anyway because she couldn't afford the property taxes. The argument escalated until Rick stormed out, shouting that Sarah would regret her decision and that she shouldn't count on his help anymore. For 3 weeks, Sarah heard nothing from either of them. She tried calling Rick several times, but he never answered. Amanda blocked her on social media. Sarah began to think that maybe she had lost her cousin forever, and, despite everything, that thought made her sadder than she wanted to admit. Then, Rick called on a Thursday evening in late June. His voice was different, softer, and more like the cousin she remembered from childhood. He apologized for the fight, admitted that he and Amanda had been out of line, and suggested that they all take a trip together to clear the air. He knew Sarah had been wanting to see the inherited property, but hadn't had a chance to drive out there yet. Why didn't they make a weekend of it? They could camp under the stars like they used to when they were kids, and maybe they could find a way to work together that made everyone happy. Sarah was hesitant, but Rick sounded genuinely remorseful. He promised that there would be no more pressure about the property, no more business talk, just family time and a chance to reconnect. Amanda got on the phone too, apologizing for her behavior and saying she was looking forward to getting to know Sarah better away from all the stress and misunderstandings of the past few months. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed. She arranged for Emma and Jake to spend the weekend with her neighbor, took Friday off from her job at the medical billing company, and packed a bag for what she hoped would be a healing trip with the 2 people she had considered her closest family. They picked her up early Friday morning in Rick's new pickup truck, a massive black Ford that Amanda claimed he had bought with his bonus from the construction company where he worked. The drive started off well enough. Rick played music from their teenage years, and Amanda shared funny stories from the casino. They stopped for breakfast at a diner in a small town Sarah had never heard of, and for a while it felt like old times. The property was even more remote than Sarah had imagined. The last 10 miles required driving on a dirt road that wasn't marked on any of their GPS systems. When they finally arrived at the trailer, Sarah was surprised by how isolated it felt. She couldn't see another building in any direction, just endless desert stretching to the horizon. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional call of a hawk or the rustle of wind through the sparse vegetation. The trailer itself was small but well-maintained. Aunt Dolores had kept it clean and organized, with a few pieces of simple furniture and shelves lined with books about desert plants and local history. There was no electricity or running water, but there was a propane stove and a small generator that Rick got running after tinkering with it for 20 minutes. They spent Friday afternoon exploring the property, walking among the cacti, and discussing the spectacular views. Sarah felt a connection to the land that surprised her. There was something peaceful about the vastness, something that made her problems seem smaller and more manageable. She could imagine bringing Emma and Jake here someday, teaching them about the desert and giving them a place to escape when city life became too overwhelming. That evening, they built a fire and cooked hot dogs over the flames. Amanda seemed more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen her, laughing at Rick's stories and asking genuine questions about Sarah's work and her children. They drank beer and watched the stars come out, and Sarah felt a surge of optimism that maybe they could rebuild their relationship after all. Saturday morning started normally. Rick made coffee on the propane stove while Amanda organized their supplies for another day of exploring. Sarah walked outside to watch the sunrise, marveling again at the beauty and silence of the place. The morning air was crisp and clean, and she felt more rested than she had in months. It was when she came back inside that she noticed Rick and Amanda having a whispered conversation that stopped abruptly when they saw her. Amanda smiled brightly and suggested they drive to a rock formation she had spotted on the eastern edge of the property, about 5 miles from the trailer. Rick agreed enthusiastically, and within 30 minutes they were bumping across the rough terrain in his pickup truck. The rock formation was impressive, a cluster of red sandstone boulders that created natural caves and climbing opportunities. They spent 2 hours exploring, taking pictures, and enjoying the scenery. Sarah was beginning to think that this trip might really heal their relationship when Amanda suggested they head back to camp for lunch. But when they got back to the truck, Rick discovered that it wouldn't start. He spent 45 minutes trying different approaches, checking the battery connections, and attempting to jumpstart the engine with a portable battery pack he kept in the truck bed. Nothing worked. The truck was completely dead, and they were stranded 5 miles from the trailer with no cell phone service and no way to call for help. Rick seemed oddly calm about the situation. He suggested that he and Amanda hike back to the trailer to get some tools and see if they could figure out what was wrong with the truck. Sarah could wait with the vehicle in case someone happened to drive by, though they all knew that was extremely unlikely given how remote the location was. Sarah agreed, thinking it made sense for her to stay with the truck while they went for help. Rick and Amanda gathered water bottles and started walking back toward the trailer, promising to return as quickly as possible. Sarah watched them disappear over a small hill, then settled into the truck's air-conditioned cab to wait. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature inside the truck became unbearable even with all the windows down. Sarah drank sparingly from the water bottle she had kept with her, trying to make it last as long as possible. She walked around the truck, looking for shade and wondering what could be taking Rick and Amanda so long. By late afternoon, she was beginning to worry. The walk to the trailer shouldn't have taken more than 2 hours, and they should have been back by now even if they had needed time to gather tools or figure out a solution. She tried her cell phone again, but there was still no signal. As the sun began to set, Sarah made a decision that probably saved her life. She started walking back toward the trailer herself, following the tire tracks from Rick's truck and trying to stay oriented in the fading light. The walk was harder than she had expected, with loose sand that made every step an effort and desert plants that caught at her clothes and scratched her arms. She reached the trailer just as full darkness fell, exhausted and scared but expecting to find Rick and Amanda working on a solution. Instead, she found something that made her blood run cold. The trailer was empty. Rick's truck was gone. All of their supplies were gone. Even her purse and overnight bag had disappeared. The only thing left was a note on the small table, written in Amanda's handwriting. Sarah, sorry it had to be this way, but you wouldn't listen to reason. Sign over the property, and we'll come back for you. Otherwise, you can figure out your own way home. There's water in the tank outside if you're smart enough to find it. Think about what's really important. And as Sarah read the note 3 times before the reality of her situation sank in. Rick and Amanda had stranded her deliberately. This had never been about reconciliation or healing their relationship. It had all been planned, from the apology phone call to the convenient truck breakdown to the suggestion that she wait alone while they went for help. She was 60 miles from the nearest town, with no transportation, no supplies, and no way to communicate with the outside world. The people she had trusted most had betrayed her in the most vicious way possible, leaving her to die in the desert unless she agreed to sign away her children's inheritance. But Sarah Martinez hadn't survived 3 years as a single mother by giving up when things got tough. As she stood in that empty trailer, reading the note by the light of her cell phone's dying battery, she felt fear and heartbreak and rage in equal measure. But underneath all of that was something stronger, a determination to survive and get back to her children no matter what it took. She found the water tank Amanda had mentioned, a 50-gallon container that Aunt Dolores had kept for emergencies. It was about half full, enough to last several days if she was careful. She also found some canned food in the trailer's small pantry, a flashlight with dying batteries, and a first aid kit. As she took inventory of her meager resources, Sarah made a promise to herself and to Emma and Jake. She would not die in this desert. She would not let Rick and Amanda win. She would find a way home, and when she did, they would face the consequences of what they had done. What she didn't know was that her ordeal was just beginning, and that survival would require every ounce of strength and determination she possessed. The desert was about to test her in ways she couldn't imagine, and help was further away than she dared to hope. Sarah spent her first night alone in the desert trailer, lying awake on Aunt Dolores's old couch, listening to sounds she had never noticed before. The desert wasn't quiet the way she had imagined. Coyotes howled in the distance, their voices rising and falling like sirens. Something scratched at the trailer's aluminum siding, probably a pack rat or javelina looking for food. Every creak and groan of the small buildings settling in the cooling air made her heart race, wondering if Rick and Amanda had changed their minds and come back, or if someone else entirely had found her isolated refuge. But morning came without incident, bringing with it the harsh reality of her situation. Sarah had always been a practical person, someone who made lists and planned ahead and thought through problems methodically. Now she applied those same skills to what might be the most important challenge of her life. Her first priority was water. The 50-gallon tank outside the trailer contained about 25 gallons of water that tasted stale, but seemed clean enough. She found several empty bottles in the trailer and filled them, calculating that if she drank conservatively, she could make the supply last 8 to 10 days. But conservatively meant rationing herself to less than a quart per day in temperatures that would reach over 100 degrees. And she knew that wasn't sustainable for long. Food was less of an immediate concern. Aunt Dolores had left behind a small stockpile of canned goods, beans, soup, peaches, and vegetables that would provide basic nutrition for several days. There was also a bag of rice and some dried pasta, though cooking them would require using precious water. Sarah decided to save the canned goods that didn't require preparation and eat them cold when necessary. Her biggest challenge was getting help. The trailer had no phone line, and her cell phone had died during the night. She found a car charger in one of the trailer's drawers, but without electricity or a vehicle, it was useless. There was the small generator Rick had gotten running on Friday, but when Sarah tried to start it again, it wouldn't turn over. She spent 2 hours examining it, trying different approaches she had seen Rick use, but she couldn't identify the problem. The dirt road leading to the property stretched 10 miles to the nearest paved highway, and Sarah knew from their drive and that they had seen no other vehicles or buildings along the way. Even if she could walk those 10 miles in the desert heat, she had no guarantee that anyone would be traveling that remote highway who could help her. Still, walking out seemed like her best option. Sarah spent Saturday morning preparing for the journey. She filled 2 water bottles and wrapped them in wet towels to keep them cool. She found a baseball cap in the trailer that would provide some sun protection, and she changed into the lightest clothing she had brought. She wrote a note explaining her situation and left it on the trailer's table in case anyone came looking for her, though she had little hope that anyone would. The walk started well enough. The morning air was still relatively cool, and Sarah felt strong and determined. She followed the tire tracks from Rick's truck, which provided clear direction even when the official road became hard to distinguish from the surrounding desert floor. For the first hour, she made good progress, covering what she estimated to be about 2 miles. But as the sun climbed higher, the heat became increasingly oppressive. The desert air was dry and thin, making each breath feel inadequate. Sweat evaporated so quickly from her skin that she didn't realize how much fluid she was losing until she began to feel dizzy and weak. By the 3rd hour, she was forced to rest in whatever shade she could find, usually under the sparse canopy of a mesquite tree or behind a large boulder. The landscape was both beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. Red rock formations rose from the desert floor like ancient monuments, and wildflowers bloomed in unexpected splashes of color among the cacti and sagebrush. But the vastness was overwhelming. Sarah could see for miles in every direction without spotting any sign of human presence. No buildings, no vehicles, no aircraft, nothing but endless desert stretching to the mountains on the horizon. After 5 hours of walking with frequent rest stops, Sarah realized she had made a critical error. She had covered perhaps 4 miles, less than half the distance to the highway, and she was already feeling the effects of heat exhaustion. Her water supply was running low, and the afternoon heat was still building. If she continued, she would likely collapse before reaching help. If she turned back now, she could probably make it to the trailer before dark. The decision to return was one of the hardest choices Sarah had ever made. Every step back toward the trailer felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that she might never see Emma and Jake again. But she forced herself to think practically. Better to retreat and try again with better preparation than to die of heat stroke on the desert floor. She reached the trailer just as the sun was setting, exhausted and demoralized but alive. Her feet were blistered despite her comfortable walking shoes, and her lips were already beginning to crack from dehydration. She drank deeply from her water supply and forced herself to eat some canned peaches, trying to replace the sugar and electrolytes her body had burned during the day. That night, as she lay on the couch listening to the desert sounds, Sarah forced herself to face the truth of her situation. She couldn't walk out in the daytime heat, especially not carrying enough water for the entire journey. She needed a better plan. Sunday morning brought new resolve and a different approach. Instead of trying to walk all the way to the highway, Sarah decided to focus on making herself visible to potential rescuers. She climbed onto the trailer's roof and looked for the highest point in the immediate area, eventually identifying a rocky hill about half a mile away that rose 50 feet above the surrounding terrain. She spent the morning gathering materials to create signals. She found reflective emergency blankets in Aunt Dolores's emergency supplies and several bright pieces of clothing that could serve as flags. She also collected dry wood and brush that could be used to build a signal fire if she heard or saw aircraft. The climb to the hilltop was challenging, but manageable in the cooler morning air. Once there, Sarah stretched the emergency blankets between rocks and weighted them down with stones, creating large reflective surfaces that would catch sunlight and hopefully attract attention from aircraft. She built a fire pit and stocked it with dry materials, then practiced lighting fires with matches from the trailer. From her elevated position, Sarah could see the road leading to the highway in the distance. She spent an hour watching for any sign of vehicles, but saw nothing. She could also see the rock formation where Rick's truck had supposedly broken down, confirming her growing suspicion that the breakdown had been staged. If they had really been trying to fix the truck, they would have left some sign of their work or at least taken tools with them when they abandoned her. The realization that Rick and Amanda's betrayal had been completely premeditated filled Sarah with a cold rage that temporarily overshadowed her fear. These weren't people who had panicked or made a mistake. They had planned this elaborate scheme to force her to sign over her property, caring nothing about whether she lived or died in the process. But anger, Sarah discovered, was actually useful in her situation. It gave her energy and focus when despair threatened to overwhelm her. Every time she felt like giving up, she thought about Rick's smug face and Amanda's cruel laugh, and she found the strength to keep fighting. Sunday afternoon and evening passed without any aircraft or vehicles appearing. Sarah returned to the trailer as darkness fell, conserving her energy and planning her next moves. She had noticed during her exploration that some of the desert plants appeared to contain water, and she decided to research survival techniques using Aunt Dolores's small library of desert guidebooks. Monday morning brought both hope and new challenges. Sarah woke before dawn and climbed back up to her signal post, where she spent 2 hours maintaining her reflective displays and watching for signs of rescue. Around 9 o'clock, she heard the distant sound of an aircraft and grabbed the signal mirror she had improvised from a piece of metal roofing. The aircraft turned out to be a commercial airliner flying at high altitude, far too high for her signals to be visible. But the fact that aircraft passed over the area meant that others might fly lower, and Sarah began to feel more optimistic about her chances of being spotted. Her water situation was becoming critical. By Monday afternoon, she was down to about 5 gallons, enough for perhaps 3 more days if she continued rationing strictly. She had tried to extract moisture from barrel cacti using techniques she had read about in Aunt Dolores's books, but the process was difficult and dangerous without proper tools, and the amount of water she could obtain was minimal. The heat was also taking a greater toll on her body each day. Despite staying in shade during the hottest parts of the afternoon, Sarah could feel herself becoming weaker and more disoriented. Her lips were badly cracked, and her skin felt tight and dry despite her careful water management. Tuesday brought new desperation, but also a potential breakthrough. Sarah had been watching aircraft patterns and noticed that military jets occasionally flew over the area, usually in the late morning or early afternoon. These aircraft flew much lower than the commercial airliners, low enough that her signals might be visible to the pilots. She spent Tuesday morning improving her signal setup, using strips of bright fabric to create arrow patterns that pointed toward the trailer and arranging rocks to spell out, "Help," in letters 20 feet tall. She also prepared multiple signal fires that could be lit quickly if she heard aircraft approaching. Around noon, she heard the distinctive sound of military jets and looked up to see two aircraft approaching from the west. Sarah lit her signal fire and began flashing her mirror toward the planes, jumping and waving the emergency blanket to attract attention. The jets passed directly overhead at what she estimated to be about 5,000 feet, easily low enough for the pilots to see her signals. But the aircraft continued on their course without any sign that they had spotted her. Sarah watched them disappear over the eastern horizon, feeling a crushing disappointment that almost broke her resolve. She had been so certain that this would be her rescue, so sure that someone would finally see her and send help. As Tuesday afternoon stretched into evening, Sarah forced herself to acknowledge that she might not be rescued in time. Her water supply would last at most 2 more days, and she was already showing signs of serious dehydration. Her thinking was becoming less clear, and she found herself making simple mistakes that could prove dangerous. But even as her physical condition deteriorated, Sarah's determination remained strong. She spent Tuesday evening writing letters to Emma and Jake, telling them how much she loved them and asking them to remember her as someone who never gave up. She also wrote a detailed account of Rick and Amanda's betrayal, including every detail she could remember about their plan and their motivations. Wednesday morning dawned clear and hot, and Sarah knew she was running out of time. She climbed to her signal post one more time, moving slowly and carefully to conserve energy. Her vision was beginning to blur occasionally, and she had to rest frequently to avoid falling. From her hilltop position, Sarah took one last look at the vast desert landscape that might become her grave. But instead of despair, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had fought as hard as she could. She had never given up. Whatever happened next, Emma and Jake would know that their mother had been strong until the very end. What Sarah didn't know was that her signals had not gone completely unnoticed. 200 miles to the north, a different kind of rescue was being prepared by people who specialized in finding the lost and bringing them home. Her ordeal was about to take a dramatic turn that would test her survival skills in ways she had never imagined. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had been flying Navy helicopters for 12 years, but he had never gotten used to the beauty of the Southwest desert from 1,000 feet up. As the pilot of a MH-60S Seahawk helicopter, he had seen coastlines and mountains, forests and plains, but there was something about the stark, endless landscape below that always caught his attention during training flights over Arizona and New Mexico. On this particular Wednesday morning, Morrison was leading a routine training exercise with his crew of 5 Navy SEALs from Team 7. The mission was straightforward: practice low-altitude navigation, tactical insertions, and search and rescue procedures in challenging terrain. They had departed from Naval Air Facility El Centro at dawn, with plans to conduct exercises in the remote desert areas east of Phoenix before returning to base by evening. The crew included some of the most experienced special operations personnel in the Navy. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Chun had completed 6 combat deployments and was an expert in wilderness survival. Petty Officer First Class David Rodriguez was a skilled medic who had saved lives in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. The other team members, Petty Officers Williams, Thompson, and Jackson, each brought their own specialized skills in reconnaissance, communications, and tactical operations. What made this crew particularly effective was their ability to adapt quickly to unexpected situations. In their world, plans changed constantly, and the difference between success and failure often came down to making the right decisions with incomplete information under extreme pressure. The training scenario for Wednesday involved simulated search and rescue operations in grid patterns over unfamiliar terrain. Morrison's helicopter was flying at approximately 800 feet, conducting systematic sweeps across sections of desert that had been assigned by their training coordinators. The crew was practicing the visual scanning techniques and communication protocols they would use in real emergency situations. It was Chief Chun who first spotted something unusual during their 3rd sweep of the morning. As the helicopter passed over a particularly remote area about 60 miles east of Phoenix, Chun noticed what appeared to be reflective flashes coming from a hilltop below. Through his binoculars, he could make out what looked like fabric stretched between rocks and possibly other man-made objects that didn't belong in the natural landscape. Morrison circled back for a closer look, bringing the helicopter down to 500 feet and slowing their airspeed to allow for better observation. What they saw below made it clear that this wasn't part of their training exercise. Someone had constructed an elaborate signal display on the hilltop, complete with reflective materials, fabric markers, and what appeared to be the word "help" spelled out in rocks. But there was no sign of the person who had created the signals. The hilltop appeared to be empty, and there were no vehicles or structures visible in the immediate area. Morrison expanded their search pattern, looking for any clue about who might have made the distress signals and where they might be now. It was Petty Officer Rodriguez who spotted the trailer about half a mile from the signal hill. The small aluminum structure was almost invisible against the desert backdrop, but Rodriguez's trained eye caught the geometric lines that stood out from the natural landscape. Morrison brought the helicopter in for a closer inspection, hovering 50 feet above the trailer while the crew searched for signs of life. At first, they saw nothing. The trailer appeared to be abandoned, with no vehicles nearby and no movement around the structure. But as they prepared to move on and report their findings to base, Chief Chin spotted movement through one of the trailer's small windows. Someone was inside, and they appeared to be trying to signal the helicopter. Morrison set the aircraft down in a clear area about 100 yards from the trailer, maintaining standard safety protocols while his crew prepared to investigate. The desert floor was harder than expected, with good soil stability that allowed for a safe landing even though they were operating outside any designated landing zone. Chief Chun and Petty Officer Rodriguez approached the trailer while the other crew members secured the helicopter and established a defensive perimeter. What they found inside shocked them, even though they had seen the aftermath of combat and natural disasters around the world. Sarah Martinez was barely conscious when they found her. She was lying on the trailer's small couch, covered by a thin blanket and clutching an empty water bottle. Her lips were severely cracked and bleeding, her skin was flushed and hot to the touch, and she was mumbling incoherently about her children and needing to get home. Rodriguez immediately recognized the signs of severe dehydration and heat exhaustion. Sarah's pulse was rapid and weak, her blood pressure was dangerously low, and her core body temperature was elevated. Without immediate medical intervention, she would likely go into shock within hours and could easily die before they could transport her to a hospital. The SEAL medic began emergency treatment while Chun searched the trailer for clues about how Sarah had ended up in this condition. What he found painted a picture of deliberate abandonment that angered him more than any enemy action he had encountered overseas. The note from Rick and Amanda was still on the table, along with Sarah's careful inventory of supplies and the letters she had written to her children. While Rodriguez worked to stabilize Sarah with 4 fluids and cooling measures, Chun radioed their situation to Morrison and the rest of the crew. This was no longer a training exercise. They had found a civilian in immediate danger of death, and their mission had become a real medical evacuation under emergency conditions. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as the SEALs worked to save her life. In her lucid moments, she tried to explain what had happened, telling them about Rick and Amanda's betrayal and her desperate attempts to signal for help. Her voice was barely a whisper, and she kept asking about Emma and Jake, begging the SEALs to make sure her children would be taken care of if she didn't survive. Rodriguez assured her that she was going to be fine, that they were going to get her to a hospital where doctors could treat her properly. But, privately, he was concerned about her condition. Sarah had been without adequate water for at least 2 days, possibly longer, and the desert heat had taken a severe toll on her body. The next few hours would be critical in determining whether she had suffered permanent damage from her ordeal. The helicopter crew faced several challenges in preparing Sarah for evacuation. The nearest hospital with trauma capabilities was in Phoenix, more than an hour away by air. Sarah needed immediate medical attention, but she also needed to be moved carefully to avoid further shock to her system. Rodriguez had to balance the urgency of getting her to definitive medical care with the risk of causing additional harm during transport. Morrison calculated flight times and fuel requirements while his crew prepared the helicopter for medical evacuation. They had enough fuel to reach Phoenix, but it would be close. They also needed to notify air traffic control and the receiving hospital about their emergency patient, coordinating with multiple agencies to ensure Sarah received the fastest possible treatment. As they prepared for takeoff, Chen continued investigating the circumstances of Sarah's abandonment. He photographed the note from Rick and Amanda, documented the evidence of Sarah's survival efforts, and gathered information that would be crucial for law enforcement. The level of planning and cruelty involved in the betrayal was unlike anything he had encountered, and he was determined to ensure that those responsible faced justice. The flight to Phoenix was the longest hour of Morrison's career. Sarah's condition remained critical throughout the journey, requiring constant monitoring and adjustment of her treatment. Rodriguez worked continuously to maintain her 4 lines and monitor her vital signs, while the rest of the crew coordinated with ground personnel to ensure everything would be ready for their arrival. Sarah regained consciousness several times during the flight, each time asking about her children and expressing disbelief that she had actually been rescued. The SEALs took turns reassuring her that she was safe, that they were taking her to the best hospital in the region, and that arrangements were being made to contact her family and ensure her children were cared for. As Phoenix came into view below, Morrison felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that they had found Sarah in time and would be able to deliver her to proper medical care, but anger at the senseless cruelty that had nearly cost an innocent woman her life. He had seen the worst of human nature in combat zones around the world, but there was something particularly disturbing about people who would betray family members and leave them to die for money. The helicopter touched down on the trauma center's helipad with perfect precision, and within minutes Sarah was surrounded by emergency room doctors and nurses who took over her care from Rodriguez. The SEAL medic provided a detailed briefing on her condition and the treatment she had received, ensuring continuity of care that could mean the difference between full recovery and lasting complications. As Sarah was wheeled into the trauma bay, she managed to grab Chen's hand and whisper her thanks. Her eyes were clear for the first time since they had found her, and there was something in her expression that told Chun she was going to be all right. She was a fighter, someone who had refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. But the SEAL team's work wasn't finished. They had saved Sarah's life, but Rick and Amanda were still free, probably believing their plan had succeeded and that Sarah was dead in the desert. Chen had already contacted law enforcement with the evidence they had gathered, and warrants were being prepared for the arrests of both conspirators. The Navy crew also faced questions about their actions during what had been supposed to be a routine training flight. Technically, they had deviated from their assigned mission to conduct an unauthorized rescue operation. But Morrison knew that no military commander would question their decision to save a life, regardless of the circumstances. As they refueled the helicopter and prepared for their return flight,